same line, but we did some digging into it. The line begins, HaChochma she'yereshes HaKoiches HaGluyim. We explained yesterday in the morning and in the evening the principle behind the words Reishis HaKoiches HaGluyim. What is so significant to the fact that it is the Reishis? And the principle that we explained was that Reishis means that there is not anything that precedes it, anything that compels it to one of the principal difference, maybe the principal difference between Seichel and everything else, and thus between the human being and everything else, is that everything in the world having the animal is also living, and so to speak, it is aware, it knows things. Everything that it knows is all in the reactive mode. Something makes it see it. Something makes it aware of it. Whether it is the danger, or it is the quest for eating it, or anything else. There is not an idea of a primary reality in the animal. That in fact it is participating in the real world. It is not participating in anything, it is just living its own life. It's existing in its own existence. As varied and as they can be migrating from one end of the world to the other end of the world, it's still just a personal involvement. The reality is based on personal experience. The human being and the Seichel is in a totally different category. Before he opens his eyes, he already knows. Like the Rambam explains in simple terms, if we are to attribute knowledge to Seichel, that knowledge has to be based on the first being. Not in the fact that something hits you over the head and therefore you know it. This first being knowledge is literally first. In other words, you begin your whole orientation, your whole life, your whole awareness that there is a first being. And you are actually not the first being. You are the creation of the first being. But this creation is real because it was created by this first being. Amit is imotzi nimtzukol animtzoy. What is the principle in Amit is imotzi nimtzukol animtzoy? That this first being created not because he is in need of something, some kind of reaction, which is the normal way of thinking in the world. What is the reason? What triggered him? What was he missing? If you talk in terms of missing, you're not talking about Seichel, right there. Seichel means that you're talking about something that has a reality of its own. That's what the Rambam says, that the first principle in Seichel, Chochmah, is known as the first being, and that everything that exists is me'amit is imotze. It represents a truth that he has bestowed and allowed his truth to be revealed in the world. We have spoken before about the oineg, the principle of the oineg, of the koyach oineg. We explained that oineg is supreme above all the koyachs. And even rotzen, I'm not going to touch it, it's a very elusive concept. Oineg is also an elusive concept, but oineg, we can isolate and identify the true oineg rather than what we call oineg, something that is caused by some experience. Oineg represents this truth because oineg does not have boundaries. Oineg is known directly by the direct contact, not by what does it mean, what's the point of it. This thus in the oineg shebenefesh is expressed and revealed the reality of the nefesh. That's what he says. Atzmi means represent the emes, that it's etzem. And this emes of the nefesh is revealed in the form of oineg. Even though it's a koyach, but this is called koyach makifi. It's a koyach that is actually representative and in a certain sense capturing the concept that this is coming from an etz. There is no explanation for it, it's just because it's real, that's why there is this oineg. This, to come into koyches pnimiyim. Koyches pnimiyim is this is a completely different realm. It's a realm of world. World means multiplicity. One thing causing the other. And as we know, we are direct witnesses. We can attest to the fact that people who study the world from a world perspective totally are unaware that there is a reality to the world. They get lost in the cause and effect process to the extent that they become oblivious to the most reality, to the greatest reality of it all. The Frierdiker Rebbe speaks about in the Sichos that you have the sunrise and you have the sunset, and then the moon and the stars and the planets, and the change of seasons and all that. What should that represent to you if you're a living human being? A living world. Not what changes, what causes the weather to change. What causes the weather to change is because the Eibusher has decreed that there's a living world, and the living world has cycles. How that occurs in actual fact, of course it occurs in certain steps, in certain stages. But what does it represent? This is the makif element. This is the Chayas. Chochma, even though this is a koyach pnimi, what does pnimi mean? That there is actual knowledge of what it is that you know. And therefore, you would think that it already is losing the essential truth principle. If you know something, it has to be the knowing and not knowing. What makes you know it? So we're saying that Chochmah has this unique element. It begins from knowing, not from not knowing. Reish is HaKoyach HaPnimi. In that respect, that Chochmah begins from knowing and not knowing, in that respect, this is like Koyach Makifi. It comes from the life of the Nefesh itself. And yet, it is not a Koyach Makifi, it's Koyach Pnimi. What is the difference between conceptualizing infinity and infinite space? We're not going to identify, just conceptualize. When we think about infinity or infinite space, the difference is that infinity does not provide a context. Infinite space is also infinite, but it's space. It has a context, permits for other things to fill the space. This is Chochmah versus the Koyach Makifi. Infinite space, in reality, there's no such thing as infinite space. Infinite space comes from infinity. We spoke about it. I'm going to touch upon this. I'm not going to go there too far. We already discussed it many times in the past. Just in 2 words. Space is a cumulative presence. Space can be divided into blocks of space. Anything that can be divided into blocks, no matter how many blocks you accumulate, you'll never reach infinity. And yet, we conceptualize space as infinite. What is the infinity element in space? The infinity element of space is not the fact of space. The infinity element of space is that infinity is behind it. And therefore it will never end. Thus Chochmah, even though it's a Koyach Pnimi, which provides for a full development, for detail, for presence, but it in itself, on its upper corner, it touches upon infinity itself. Even though you cannot really conceptualize infinity in Chochmah. In Chochmah you have the infinite space, how infinity manifests itself in the Koyach Makifi. But there is a similarity. This is why Chochmah is the transmitter of Oineg, which is infinity itself, into the Koches Pnimim arena. Let us go back to space for one moment. The infinity of space, as we spoke, and I said there is not such a thing as infinity of space. But infinity of space alerts you to infinity per se. And the difference and space, let's say it's the infinity of space. Space provides for blocks of space, which provides for finite items to be placed in the space. And here is the important thing that we are struggling over here for the past who knows how long. That yes, indeed, there is infinity of space, but this infinity of space, as I said, has blocks. What is the difference between the infinity of space and the block of space? The infinity of space relates you to infinity. The block of space only relates you to the infinity of space. But in terms of its presence, block of space and space in general is the same thing. If in space there's an element of Oineg, therefore that trickles down into the block of space. It's also in its own way infinite.
Seems quite apparent that with that mashal seems just quite apparent, whereas with Oneg and then the lower koichas, it seems like a greater distance.
That's why a mashal is used to draw your attention and insight to something infinitely superior to it. Because space is a physical entity. Oneg and koichas are not. Life is not. Oineg is a representative of life. And to say that life itself, life of the nefesh, which is infinity, godly, finds its way in a simple physical action. Yes, indeed, it's much more elusive. So what you said is what we call a truism. That a mashal is easier to understand than the real thing.
Yeah, but okay. But what can we learn out from the mashal? Because there by the space, it seems like they're just of the same type. They have the same choimer almost.
the same thing. That's what's a mashal. The same thing. This oineg itself is to be found in every kohen. That's what I said. Everything.
Yeah.
The basic presence of everything is based on the oineg element that's in it.
Right. It shows somehow very distinct definitions, but inside of that is this basic oineg.
Right.
Hey, Paltiel.
Yes, sir.
I'm not fully getting the oineg aspect in the block for the infinity in the block of space. I see. Well, why do we say that there's infinity in the block of space?
I don't understand your question. There is the oineg shebenefesh, and then there is the oineg as it manifests in a particular koyach. The nefesh, pardon me, the nefesh enlivens the entire reality that the nefesh occupies, so to speak, or enlivens, affects the whole body, for example. The nefesh, as it is in the body, You could call it as a block of space. It's various koiches hanefesh. This is not the whole nefesh. It's koiches hanefesh. But these koiches have an element of nefesh in them, each one of them. Even though the koiches are mislabesh in individual places in the body and function. Go ahead.
There's only the block of space because there is the infinite space. And there's only the infinite space because the infinity is standing behind the space.
Right. That is definitely the case. This is what we are saying over here. Yes, oiris atzmim shebenefesh. Oiris atzmim, this in our terminology, you could refer to it as infinity itself. And that translates in koiches makifim, which is the infinite space. And the chokhmah takes the koiches makifim and breaks it down into blocks. And permits the Bina to delve into it, to identify different structural blocks of it.
That means it translates on a functional level.
Ultimately, yes. That's what Makif means. Huh? The Makif is translated into P.
Wow. The infinite space is a very clear muscle for Makif.
Yes. And it's so clear that we may lose sense that that is only emotional. And it is far from the nimshal. In order to see the true moshal element in it, we have to find the beetle of space. Like we said, there is no such thing as infinite space.
You have to find the what?
The beetle
of space
element of it. As we
What
said,
do you mean by that?
again, there is no such thing as infinite space.
Space that by definition is finite.
Space. I explained. We cannot. We're not going to find the end of space. We will never find it because it's based on infinity. But space is blocks of space. Blocks do not constitute infinity.
Oh,
So space is infinite to the extent that it's bottled to the infinite.
Oh, that's right.
It's not, doesn't have its own infinity. It's
Right.
has it-
That's exactly right.
So therefore, even one block is also the same thing as just you don't see it.
What's exactly right?
That space, the infinity of space, is based on the fact that it's bottled to the infinite.
What if space is expanding infinitely?
That's because there's more revelation from the infinite.
The real Maki is Mamish infinite, is infinite, not some kind of block. That's the point.
Well, Makif, no. The infinite is not Makif. Makif is that which provides for Pnimi. Makif is also a kind of transmitter, but on a different level. Transmits the Oiras Atzmim to an arena where his Oiras Pnimim are possible.
Once you went that far, you might say that searching for infinity in space per se. It's folly. It's like it's fallacy. It's a wrong notion.
Okay. There is another point which I wanted to associate with the words Reishis HaKoches HaGluim, and that will kind of, I think, complement the message over here. The principle that the Rebbe is presenting over here is that it's Reishis HaKoches HaGluim, and the principle of Reishis we discussed and explained that the Reishis means that it is, and it relates directly to the reality itself. There is nothing triggering it. It's not a response to anything. Therefore, it receives this in a purely, almost like Oineg itself. But it's Kachdakulim. Harehi Keli Legilu Ho'erazu Atzmi Moshe Benefesh. And therefore, that's what makes Chochmah a Keli for the revelation of Kirches Atzmi Shebenefesh. Because Chochmah has no definitive presence. Anything that has a trigger has a definitive presence. In other words, I can accept that which is predefined in my presence. What brought me into existence? Such and such. Therefore, I can relate only to that which is part of my existence. Chochmah does not have that trigger, which means Chochmah is totally open to accept whatever there is to accept. And therefore it is a keli for Kirches Atzmi, for Oides Atzmi, which is an anomaly. And the Rebbe then brings it down a notch, which means it says the koiches which are the aspect of makifim of nefesh. What's makifim? Makifim already said this is a notch down from atzmi. This is the effect of permitting the actual space element in our motion. Permitting there to be not the infinity itself, but an infinite something. And that comes with Koyach HaChochmah B'chinas Pnimis. In the Nefesh, it is Makif. Permitting this element of Oineg, for example, because it is part of the Atzmi reality. But in Chochmah it comes Pnimi, which Pnimi means that it identifies with it. This is the primary difference between Chochmah and Oineg itself. And our moshel for sight, in sight as a moshel for Chochmah. And what is the sight is, as we pointed out, is infinite, is instantaneous. But in sight, there is that element of coming into being. I can see it and not see it. In Makifim, I cannot have Oineg and not have it. It is part and parcel of the reality itself. Chochmah can see it and also not see it. I mean, so not see it doesn't mean that Chochmah exists and not see it. Chochmah can be, you can close your eyes and not see. back inside. When you close your eyes, that which you can see did not dissipate. And when you open your eyes, you see the same reality. You see it because it's real, not because you detect it, because you searched and you were affected by it. But nevertheless, there is that element in it, that experience. And therefore there is the identity element. That's why this is a pnimi rather than matter. Sight is a pnimi koyach.
What do you mean by identity? I'm not sure I get it.
Identity means that you know what you're seeing, and that enables you then afterwards to come down a notch and identify various parts of what you see, or even not identify places where you can put things in. Sight is in itself is beyond it. You see the panorama as a whole. All right, we have to interrupt. Okay, this is it.
Did we do anything inside? Did we do anything inside?
Good Shabbos, come to.
We always do a little bit inside.
Ron, is Shlomo Katz going to be here this Shabbos?